that service and servant leadership mindset, like, really knocked me out of that, like, what ultimately was a selfish cycle, constantly
Yeah.
focusing on myself and my body and what I ate and how I performed. And, somebody had told me a couple years ago, but I was realizing it then, that they said, "Mac, if you spent the amount of time, that you spend worrying about food or your body or being upset like this because of this anxiety and invested it into other things, like think of all the things you could do." And that was both a sad and very real, comment and realization for me that came to fruition my senior year, because it was that give to others, and I don't even have time to think about, these things that used to be all consuming.
Hey, everyone. I'm so happy that you are here. We've got the amazing Mackenzie. How do you pronounce your last name? I want to say this correctly.
Saint Ange.
Saint Ange. I love that. See, I was going to say it wrong. And, of course, probably a professional podcast host, of which I do not claim to be, would have gotten that beforehand. But I also like the vulnerability. So, Saint Ange is a former hockey player, then to rugby, and now works for US skiing and snowboarding. We're going to find out more about her amazing journey. And she's got also a cause that she's really passionate about that we'll talk about at the end, about helping athletes sort of like find their bearings post sports life. So, Mackenzie, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well. I'm happy to be here and excited to dive into this conversation.
Awesome, awesome. So, hockey for girls. This is not something we hear a lot about. So, I would love to hear your journey. I always like to start with the beginnings. So, how do you find yourself to hockey? Is it the first sport you pick up? Where did your sports journey begin?
Yeah, hockey fell into one of many. I grew up in a small town in Vermont, and my parents moved there because they were really looking to have an active lifestyle, to have kids that just embrace the outdoors and the mountains. And they were former competitive skiers. So I think they initially envisioned us, spending a lot of family time on the mountain, which we did. But ironically, even growing up in a ski town, I found my way over to the rink, which at the time was really just a tin roof with chain link fences. So why I wanted to spend every waking minute there, I don't know. But I actually was a multi-sport athlete kind of up through even the end of high school, and was able to mix in, club soccer, competitive soccer. That was kind of my first love of a sport, actually. But then the doors for hockey started to open up. I was able to, play at an elite level and with some of the best girls in the country. And I think a combination of factors led me to want to pick hockey to specialize in. So
Okay. So let's go back to what you said there, the soccer part. So when you're a multi-sport athlete, which by the way, there's lots of studies about the benefits of, not specializing at too young of an age to kind of get the benefits of all the different sports. But when did it become apparent to you that soccer wasn't it for you, or was it just that hockey was more?
see, it's really funny. I look back and I wouldn't even say that either of those statements are true. Like,
Okay.
soccer felt like it was it. Like, I was a more naturally talented soccer player than I ever was as a hockey player. I had a leg up for my age group more so in soccer than I ever did in hockey. And with hockey, I think what happened was I loved being able to feel like there was a chip on my shoulder, that there's something to prove, that there was something to work towards, that my potential in it was like for me to uncover. And so when I step on a soccer field versus a rink with hockey gear on, like, it was two very different feelings for me. Like, we got to win a couple state championships, like led my team through penalty kicks and through all of that as a sophomore. And like, would step on the field and feel really confident, hear the other team saying, like, "Oh, like, what do we do? She's on the field, coach. Like, I don't know how to, mark her." Like, that was such a cool feeling. And I have to say, like, I never got to experience that in hockey. I never felt like I fully like had that confidence. But what I did get to have was an environment where, like, I really got to learn like what grit meant, and what, hard work and dedication meant. And it's a unique sport as well in the way that you operate as a team. You're out on the ice for a 45-second shift, and you got to get off, mentally reset, and trust your teammates out there to, do that work while you are waiting for your next turn. So there was a number of factors, and one of the best hockey academy in the country was located right in my backyard. Again, ironic that it was in a ski town, but I enrolled as a freshman and kind of kept that balance of multi-sport athlete up until my junior year, and then shifted to say, okay, college hockey is, where I see doors opening and what I'd like to pursue alongside some of my other academy teammates.
First and foremost, that's fascinating. For you to be so naturally gifted in a sport to the point that the competition is like afraid of you, like, I don't know what to do. And then to decide to specialize in hockey because it challenges you, because it's not something that comes naturally to you. And as you've already suggested, it didn't ever feel like that same pinnacle level. But that's interesting. So do you remember when, like, if you could take us back, because of course this is called the mental advantage, and I'm always curious, when you were making that decision, and I know there was grit involved in this and that, but like, who was talking to you at that time? What was going on for you mentally? Because, I'm thinking the soccer coach is probably like you're dragging the soccer coach by your leg and like, no, coach, I'm going to hockey. But tell me a little bit more about that story.
I mean, yeah, actually, you brought up, an interesting situation where it was probably my freshman year of high school and trying to manage, where summer hockey starts to cut into spring soccer and winter seasons overlap and things like that. And there was one other girl on my team who actually, funny enough, followed a similar path, played for the same club soccer team and the same competitive hockey academy. And so the two of us, we'd say, well, like, we have this conflict and that conflict. And it was interesting, particularly as we got older, particularly as coaches start to expect more and more and multi-sport athletes start to taper off a little bit, to make that case for ourselves and say, look, we can show up and we're going to put the work in and be dedicated to two sports. And, if we miss this practice, we're not like, failing as teammates. We're just trying to balance our lives
Right.
here. So that was really, really interesting. And yeah, I think the other piece for me too is like, I think I took a realistic look as well at the fact that I was competing, yes, at a high level in soccer, absolutely, and but it was Vermont in the grand scheme of the country,
Okay.
and I think I was also looking at that and saying, to really pursue that, it would either mean going to like a prep school or moving somewhere else, things that I easily would have committed to do. But at the time, I was still walking that line with hockey. And part of me, looks back and could have seen myself go to like an IMG academy down in Florida, could have seen myself go to, any New England prep school. But I think in that case, I would have held on to soccer and hockey, and then, maybe played both at a D3 level or something like that, and found a medium. And I think there was some part of me that was like, no, I want to like really rise to the top in what I'm doing. And combination of logistics, passion, heart, what it was asking of me and who I wanted to step up and be. It's tough, I
Yeah.
don't know how I quite made the decision, but at the end of the day, like, you look back and you wouldn't necessarily change anything because I wouldn't be where I am now. But
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I love that. And I think that speaks to your character, right? Like, you're like, you had the awareness, which we need so many athletes to have, that, hey, I'm a big fish in a small pond. So
Mhm,
this is not on par with like what it would be if I go to this other place. Yeah, of course, I'm going to put the work in. I'm going to do everything to be my best. But
mhm,
this sport has a challenge and an upside right now that's going to put me to the test and going to give me that, because like, yeah, once you kind of best the competition and you're kind of like, this is cool, but I need more. And so
mhm.
I think that's great. I think that's great. So you decide to specialize in hockey. Was there anything, and I think, this is helpful to know, was there anything mentally different for that journey than it was playing soccer? Because you had played soccer and obviously won a state championship, went through the ranks. So what was more mentally demanding about hockey, or would you say they were the same, or just different sports but different demands?
I think like what I loved about soccer and what I felt so comfortable with the game was being able to like settle into 90 minutes and like my mind was just always looking at like, okay, I can come up against the same defender 2, 3 times and I can start playing with their head. Like I can make that pass once, but I can keep the ball the next time and, you know, find that rhythm and be able to build like relationships and connections with teammates, the entire, field of folks out there and be able to say, look, I'm seeing this. Can we adjust here? I'll come to you and you shift there. And that builds and builds over 90 minutes. Hockey is so quick. It's so instinctive. And there are systems and there are like, guidelines that we play within, but you see most of the ice from the perspective of your singular line of 3 people as a forward. And then every time you're out, yeah, you might come across the same player, a couple times, but things are going to shift. Like once in a while, there's strategy in matching up lines, but in general, you roll to keep legs fresh and, to keep people in more strategic positionings of like power play, penalty kill. So a little bit less of like, settling into that rhythm and repeatability that I really loved about soccer. And all that to say too, like I think um, I was watching soccer. This is an interesting point, right? That you were saying about women's hockey, not
Yeah.
seeing it so often. Like I was watching women's soccer from the time that I was young. I remember that was like a huge thing that bonded my dad and I. We'd sit down, on a Saturday morning and we'd watch the women's national team play. And those were the first women that like inspired me to be an athlete because, I knew every, woman on that team. And I remember the commercials and the ads they put out, which was like the greatest team you'd never heard of. And that just like hit me. And we'd pause the TV and we'd talk about this line and how you want to play that ball. I never did that with hockey. And like
Yeah.
to this day, like I couldn't even tell you like my favorite NHL team. Like I didn't watch a lot of hockey.
Yeah.
Let alone women's hockey because it was not visible and
Right.
I didn't know who to look up to. So I think that's the other piece is like growing up in my town where this hockey academy was located, there were times I would go to the rink and I'd see those girls play. I'm a middle schooler, they're high school, but they're the best high schoolers in the country. And it was like, oh, I could do that with hockey. Like it opened up my brain and mind to the potential. So that was huge. But I think to your question, I wasn't as instinctive with my awareness of, where to be, how to play on the ice, as I was with soccer because I didn't grow up watching it and I didn't, feel as natural and as comfortable in those systems. And so I was a very disciplined player. It was like, okay, this is our forecheck. Like 9 times out of 10, that is the exact line I'm going to skate. And so I got to be a really reliable, really, like I said, disciplined, kind of defensive minded, like strategic in the team sense kind of player. Whereas often some of the girls who got the attention, got the opportunities, a little bit flashier, they were just trying things. They didn't care if they failed. They, had more of that sixth sense. So it was a different style of play.
But I love that you've played both sides, right? So the idea of being able to be flashy, being able to be that out front runner, and then going to a role player, which is like, you can depend on me. And I think people undervalue the role players, right? Because you don't
Yeah.
have a LeBron James, because like you don't have those flashy players without the role players who free them up to be a little bit more reckless, because you know that I'm going to be clutch on those rebounds, for basketball, for example, or I'm going to be there. So I think that's great. So tell me a little bit about, because I don't know everything about your story, which is what I love about these. Tell me, so you're transitioning to kind of specializing in hockey your junior year, you're seeing an upside. What was the biggest high school moment in hockey for you? And do you remember where you were? I mean, like how you felt, any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I can share an on ice moment if you want, but
Yeah.
but for me, the first thing that comes to mind is committing to play collegiate hockey. And so that like I remember in detail, I was in Rhode Island visiting family, had gone through a couple of different conversations with Dartmouth that I ended up committing to, but also with other schools and kind of playing out those options.
Yeah.
And um, so I had expressed, that this is my preference and was waiting for kind of the other half to make their decision.
Yeah.
And yeah, you look at your phone, you see who's calling, and you get the butterflies, right? I mean, it's interesting how many parallels there are from the recruiting process to like dating.
Yeah.
You know, as weird as it sounds. So, like my main interest was calling me back. It's very exciting.
Right.
Um, and it wasn't a particularly long conversation, but I still remember, Mark Hudak, who's the head coach at the time, saying like, yeah, we would love to have you. We have a spot, if you'd like it. And so all of a sudden the ball's in my court. But, you know, in making that decision, I pretty much knew that was a choice I wanted to make. My parents wanted to talk it over a little bit just to say, like, okay, it's a great school. Like, that's incredible. Do you understand the financial implications of that, given that it's Ivy League and there are no scholarships available, et cetera? But, end of the day, it was the right thing. I can say that for, 4 years out, it was the right thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was cloud nine. That was like, okay, it was worth it. Like,
Yeah.
I have this next opportunity, this next chapter, and time to keep grinding.
Nice.
Mm.
So, was there any schools that were, now obviously it was your intention to go Ivy League. You're clearly academically gifted because you can't go Ivy League for a sport if you don't have the grades, or at least that I know of. Let me say that. Um, was there a school that was offering any partial scholarships? Was there anything that kind of pulled you like to be a little bit more like, yeah, I mean, the esteem of like going to a Dartmouth, but the financial help my family, was any of that going on for you?
So it's interesting. I would actually say like I grew up an hour away from Dartmouth, and
Okay.
I didn't really think like much of it. I didn't dream of going there. I mean, I had seen their women's team play once in a while, but it wasn't like that's my spot. Like
Yeah.
that's my goal. I went into the process of recruiting thinking I grew up in a small town. I've seen but the positive and the negative sides of sport culture and coaches that do or don't care about their athletes.
Right.
And you know, I know I need to not just make this decision based on hockey, but it plays a huge role. And I was so hungry to like play for a team again, because the hockey academy that I was at was 40 girls under one roof fighting for the same collegiate spots across 30 teams. And so it got like kind of cutthroat.
Yeah.
And I was hungry to put on a jersey and feel like these people are with me, not against me. And um that's the vibe that I really got from Dartmouth, from the coach, from the team. And then there was the additional aspects of flexibility to go abroad as a student athlete, very uncommon, particularly with hockey, because the season runs October to, February, March. In a semester school, you have to be enrolled for that entire time. At
Yeah.
Dartmouth on quarters, you can take 10 weeks in the spring. And I went to France and then I did an internship. And so
Wow.
it really added value, I think, to my student athlete experience that I wouldn't have otherwise gotten. To the financial aspect, I was talking to, a couple other schools. Providence, for example, is one, and, you know, ultimately decided like that the team and that culture was something I was so hungry for.
Mm.
And that I was familiar with that like small school vibe. Dartmouth has 2,000 undergrad.
Okay.
Growing up in a small town, like
Right.
it might be four. It's been a minute. But anyways, it's small. It's
Yeah.
small. And student athletes take up about a quarter of the campus. So it's
Wow.
pretty cool to, feel like you have that community and that you have a place in that group. And that's the vibe that I got growing up in a small town in Vermont. So that was familiar as well. I did not appreciate the financial aspect of my decision.
Okay.
I appreciate it now that
Yeah.
I'm paying off student loans. But at the time, I actually remember, I got the phone call cloud nine, and then, an hour later, I'm sitting down at a table with my parents, and I'm like, "Can you believe it? This is amazing, the best thing ever." And they're like, "Okay, well, like, financials." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, why aren't you happy for me? Like, why are you talking about like boring, sad stuff? Like, no." be happy. And, you know, that I look back and I definitely laugh at myself in that conversation and my, immaturity and lack of perspective. But the amount that my student athlete experience and then my experience just as part of the Dartmouth community has given and given and given again to me both in those 4
Right.
years and since, like that was truly an investment. And
Yeah.
I think the other part was as I got through my 4 years and got closer and closer to hitting the reality of paying my student loans, I felt the pressure to make that experience worth it and
Yeah.
to play every shift as hard as possible, to study for every test and make sure I was prepared. I had some people, paid full boat and other people were on full scholarship and there was or full financial aid. It was
Yeah.
quite the range and you get word of like, well, each class costs, X $100. Don't
Right.
skip. So that resonated with me at least.
That's really something I hadn't considered before is why there's like that pressure coming out because it is you're faced with that reality. So as you're graduating, you know that the whatever the deferment on those loans ends, and then it's time
Yeah.
to deal with the reality. So yeah, like I don't think I've ever heard it put quite that way, and like obviously I experienced it too, but I don't know that I was thinking of that. But yeah, it is a reality when you get that bill in the mail, and you're like, how long is it going to take me to pay this off?
Yeah.
So, yeah, for sure. So, you spoke about the culture, and I think this is important, right? Because when we talk about the mental game and you talk about the good and the bad coaching experiences, what did Dartmouth have culturally that made you like, yeah, this is because I've experienced that. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about the not, you don't have to name names, but like the bad and then how this was different.
Yeah, so, like I said, I think the sour taste in my mouth primarily came from high school. I would not have been the hockey player that I am today or have gotten to play a D1 level if it wasn't for going to that hockey academy because we were able to spend so much time on the ice. I was being pushed and playing with the top girls in the country. They're currently in the Olympics, like both teammates from high school and college and you
Nice.
know primarily all playing professionally, if they're still involved in the game. And so that was incredible. But from a coach and a culture perspective, the vision wasn't there or the understanding of the personal level beyond just the on ice performance,
Right.
let alone that we were teenage girls, majority of them living away from home. I lived at home for 2 years, given the nature of my unique situation being from that town, but I stayed in the dorms for my second 2 years, and honestly, I'm glad I didn't start as a freshman because, we've for, self-identifying females out there, you've been a teenager and you know how gnarly girls can get, let alone those who are competitive.
Right.
So the drama among the dorms and all of that was a lot. I'm glad I didn't have to face, 4 whole years of that, but it wasn't supervised, it wasn't managed, it
Got it.
wasn't guided. And, there were times where stuff on ice played out off ice and vice versa. Um, and then coaches that, would pick favorites and, would say, oh, like, you know, there's horror stories. I guess I don't need to go into the really, really bad ones, but, ones where, you're made to feel like you're crazy, that some aspect of the culture is off or wrong, or that,
Gaslighting. Yeah.
yeah, that you're not good enough. Or, that if you didn't like participate or suck up, that some aspect of your athletic success was going to be compromised.
Before
So,
you go into the good thing about Dartmouth, I think it's
mhm,
important for people to know these things because, of course, we've got these elite academies like the IMGs and the different places across the country. And I have no knowledge of what goes on in IMG. So I'm just naming them because I know their name.
yep,
But I think it's important to see that because there is that feeling of, oh, like one, you're away from your parents.
yeah,
Two, you're getting your validation from this coach. And then there's this competing for that attention. And then it becomes a very cutthroat situation. If the coach is not managing that or the team or whatever is not being held to a certain way, yeah, that can devolve and it can become about just who's the best. And those are the people I focus on. And yeah, your attitude is not high caliber enough to navigate this. So, you just need to suck it up kind of thing. So I think it's important for people to know that that culture definitely is one of the reasons why people stop playing sports. So kudos to you for staying with your vision and your dream, even despite having to navigate those situations. So what did you see at Dartmouth that was like, okay, I feel like this is going to be a safer place for me, as well as a place I can excel?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I think it probably would have gone for any collegiate team. I saw a team that was like in it together, like had this common mission. There was no, at the time, next level outside of the Olympic level
Right.
for people to be, elbowing each other out for.
Right.
So that was a great start. And that was just like, a win for getting to,
Right.
move up to play collegiately. And then, beyond that, I saw a coach who invested an entire spring term and off season on weekly meetings on different character values and, a very clear mission and like vision and value for the team. Like our slogan was team tradition excellence and, team came first. And also, a program that had years and years of, second one being tradition and a legacy that you felt like you were stepping into. And, it was made very clear for recruits and for freshmen, like, hey, this is what we expect of people and how we hold ourselves as Dartmouth hockey players and what that means on campus. Like, we're not the team that goes out and, gets blasted and, just kind of makes fools of ourselves. Like, we uphold our reputation and that means a lot to us. And we're laying the groundwork of, next generations to come. I mean, so strongly to the point that the coach that recruited me retired after my junior year, and we had a new coach coming in my senior year. And our class of 7 seniors, rising seniors, like that we bonded together. Like it didn't matter who leadership was at the time during that transition. It was like, how can we communicate to this coach and to incoming freshmen and kind of maintain those aspects of the culture that we have just valued, to the sky because they meant the world to us. And that's what it means to be a Dartmouth hockey player.
Nice. Nice.
Mm.
So obviously, having to balance, we talked a little bit about like the balance the world of academics at a very rigorous academic institution where it's highly valued, in addition to being an athlete. And I know it was challenging for me, and I certainly wasn't at Dartmouth, and I was at a much bigger school, Michigan State University. But I'm just curious, like, what helped you mentally to get through that whole period, in addition to, I'm sure the culture helped, but what personally got you through?
I'd say, in part, maybe not the best way to get through, but like a perfectionist aspect of me. And that was, a strong driver of keeping up with life when it's getting thrown at you fast paced that way. Hockey school, friends, sleep, food.
Yeah.
So that was a big piece. And also just like I said, kind of like grit that I learned in high school to one, like pursue my dream regardless of, whatever drama was going on around me and to learn and develop and get better as a player to be able to compete with the girls that I was around. Like I took that and brought that into my collegiate experience as well. But I think, there is something about that fast paced, high pressure environment. A little bit of context about Dartmouth is, like I said, we operate on a quarter system, which provided the flexibility for going abroad, different things. But it means that our terms are 10 weeks long and dive really deep, really fast into 3 courses at a time. So
Mhm.
like people talk about syllabus week at normal schools or like syllabus week, we have stuff due on the first day of class. Like it is go. Yeah. It is
Wow.
go, go, go. So I think I also really like settled into a rhythm that I'm still trying to figure out how that has reverberated or like echoed into my life now, which is burn bright, burn out for 10 weeks, breathe, reset, do it again. And 4 years of that cycle.
Yeah.
So, that would be quite the roller coaster. And I pretty quickly found, just due to a variety of different like personal aspects, being mental health, disordered eating, the loss of a friend, like given that you're supposed to process all of that or handle it in how quick all of that was going and everything else I had on my plate, I needed more support. So I also, sought out a therapist and was able to take advantage of that. That kind of helped me maintain that balance a little
Did
bit
the
better.
school have it, or was it so it was a school therapist?
Yeah, it was
Okay,
through the
cool.
school, and it was actually an individual that primarily worked with athletic teams,
Oh,
so
that's
had
perfect.
that sport
That's
background,
perfect.
yeah.
I love that. Now, was that suggested to you, or did you just have the wherewithal to know?
It was suggested to me when I was, like, grieving the loss of a friend because that was kind of a pretty acute event, like,
Yeah.
okay, if you're processing this, support could help. But that wasn't actually the time that I really, like, was open to it. It took
Mhm.
another year or so, for me to realize that it was actually kind of, like I said, the perfectionism, the, personal stress you put on yourself, the identity aspect of I'm a hockey player, and whether I succeed or fail on the ice determines my value off the ice. And, that being kind of a roller coaster. And
Mhm.
then really struggling with food and body image, just kind of crippling anxiety around some of that, recognizing like this is taking up time that I really would like to be able to spend in other areas of my life, whether it be self-growth or, better friendships or relationships or just time to be able to kick back and relax rather than have an anxiety attack. So I kind of made a pact with one of my teammates and she was going through something as well.
Yeah.
And we said, all right, I'll make an appointment by Friday if you do. And that's when it really stuck for me.
Wow. So yeah, definitely that's so great to have. Like sometimes we are more willing to do things when we're helping someone else. And so
Yeah.
in the process of helping her, I'm sure like it was like, okay, cool. I'll do this if you do it. And so really great that you had that thought to like go get that support. But yeah, sometimes it takes a while. Like I always say, we're planting seeds. You never know when they're going to be like, yeah, I'll do that. That sounds good. Or years after they've talked to you. So I want to talk a little bit about there's two things you just mentioned that I think we have to touch on. We can't go past, which is one, the value on the ice and, spilling over to my value off the ice, or my performance on the ice spilling over to my value off the ice. Say more about that and how, when you first noticed that you would do that. And it's fine if you go back and then come forward, but I'm just curious because I know this happens a lot for athletes, but I think it's helpful to start to see where that starts to like, did it happen once you got to the college level, or did you notice it before that?
One of the distinct memories that comes to mind was after my freshman year at this hockey academy. And, um, one of the aspects was there was a girl who was also a freshman. And, in the eyes of people around her, wasn't at a, skill level that seemed to be fitting in with the team. And the coaches kind of said to a couple players, like, make make it not fun, make it
Wow.
not fun for her, that she doesn't wanna come back, and, um, that was nobody, like, targeted me out that way, but I still remember finishing my freshman year and recognizing, like, this is a coach, this is a team, this is an academy, like, I'm paying for it, but at the same time, they get to say who's on the roster, and I was bawling in my kitchen with the seed of an idea planted that, what if they don't invite me back next year?
Mm,
And yeah, literally bawling, like, at a loss. I
yeah.
can still, like, remember, how vividly emotions kinda, like, play out in memories. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so, that's memory 1, right? Like, of not fear of not being good enough, and what does
Yeah.
that mean for me and who I am and, how people see me and what I do next. I was invited back. I played all 4 years, I worked my way up and got
Yeah.
consistent playing time, my senior year and obviously committed to play for Dartmouth. But, like you said, that seed of an idea being planted and
Yes.
growing and growing and growing and, continuing to be in that competitive environment, probably only watered it and gave it light and
Yeah.
made it grow.
Yeah. So you're struggling with that because you're, like always, and it's like that thing, right? Even if no one's ever saying like, we don't want Mackenzie on the team, there's that feeling of like, well, what if one day they just decide I'm not the best, or somebody new that they like better comes along? And so even if no one's saying that or even putting that energy out, we're concerned because we have this trauma from that experience. So yeah, that's something that's really, I think, important, because I don't think people realize how long that stuff stays with you. It could be one event, like you said, in your freshman year in high school, and then you're 35 somewhere and you're still having that same feeling, even if the ice and the hockey and all that is not still present.
Yeah.
So the other thing I want to talk about is your body dysmorphia or body challenges, however you would characterize it. So I apologize if I'm not saying that correctly. Where do you feel like that came from? Because all of a sudden, because obviously that's going to affect you mentally, right? What you're eating, what you're doing, your energy levels. So where does that start to show up for you, and how is that affecting you mentally while you're performing?
Yeah. So, I mean, interesting where like it breaks my heart how commonplace this seems to be in females and in female sport these days. I can think back to like end of elementary school, like running around in the summer and like as it might happen, you get chafing. And I remember thinking like, this is painful. This is, uncomfortable. It's embarrassing. And this wouldn't happen if my legs didn't rub together, if my thighs weren't so big.
Right.
Um, so that I like remember that for sure. But I think like when I started to like manipulate food or orient like good and bad foods and what that meant and really like keep an eye on a scale and have a goal in mind, that was more like my junior year of high school. And like I would say that came with feeling like, okay, I'm committing to hockey and there's more and more pressure to like now be really good at hockey. And seeing teammates, I had a teammate who was bulimic and like, I was close to her, and it's kind of weird, like those those storylines, those habits, those patterns
Yeah.
can become contagious. Um, but the way it played out for me was really like orthorexic tendencies and habits and patterns where, like I said, certain foods were good, certain foods were bad. Like, um, and and I would get crippling anxiety if I like was out of balance on like, quote unquote good foods and things like that. And it was really easy for me to get it twisted in my own mind and, hide to others whether I realized I was doing it or not, because I could say, well, I just want to train really hard. I just want to be like a phenomenal hockey player and I
Right.
want to be fit. And if I'm fitter, I'll be faster. And if that, coach said I need to be faster on the ice, so this is how I'm going to do it. And it just looks like I have a really good work ethic and a lot of discipline, when in fact what's going on behind the scenes is mental health.
Wow. So orthorexic, just and you may have defined it, but just so that the people that are listening know, what does
Mhm.
that mean specifically?
So it's a pursuit of quote unquote health to the point that it's unhealthy.
Ah, I've never heard that
Mhm.
before.
Yeah, yeah.
This is that Dartmouth education. So
Well, I'll say like I didn't learn that term until probably, my sophomore year in college. And when I did, it was like, oh, I might have a problem.
okay.
Like
Got it.
this applies to me. Like, and I also remember like, so I'd say my like true like battle with this went from started in my junior year of high school and, even to a year after college. So that's a solid 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
And now I'm in a healthier place, but it's one of those things that like the voice doesn't go away, it just gets quieter and you learn to, have another one be louder. Um, and yeah, I think there's just a ton of learning that went
Yeah.
through that process and realizing like, a year after school, I stopped tracking, calories and food in an app. So the first time I logged everything I ate for 4 or 5 years. And
Wow.
when I stopped, I was like, oh, normal people don't do this. They eat an apple and that's all they do.
Just eat
They
the apple.
they
Right.
don't write it down. They don't track it. They don't look at the carbs and the sugars. Like, point
Yeah.
blank. And um so there's been a lot of like different different parts to the healing process. But yeah, it was definitely a part of my journey.
That's just I think you've opened my eyes to something that I wasn't aware of. Like this thing of like you think that athlete is just really intent on, doing what's necessary for the fuel for the sport, but not really realizing that we're actually dealing with something that is an obsessive behavior that could, obviously unchecked and continued is going to be very harmful and probably already is very harmful for that person. So you're challenged with all this stuff. You go to see the therapist. Do you see any like around that time? Because of course, the advantage is like now that I'm getting help. Do you see a change in what's happening on the ice as a result of this support?
So I will say like my first year, like with therapy was just a lot of go in and emotion dump and like try and get words out between the like overwhelming feelings.
Yeah.
And I think, one thing that my eyes were open to was just the fact that like, okay, this is a story. This is a story that you are telling yourself, but you've been living in it so long and so deeply that you don't recognize it as that anymore. It's
Right.
just what you think is reality. It's
Yeah.
like the chocolate cake is reality making me less valuable of a human,
Yeah.
was the way my brain was coding things. And I think one of the most powerful thing that my therapist was able to do for me is say like, I grant you permission to change that story. And, let's figure out what that looks like.
Mm,
So I think I got to that point more towards my senior year. But another interesting aspect was that, like I said, we went through that coaching change. And as a senior in a leadership group and ultimately named a captain, it was like, whoo, okay, the boat is turning. We have a new coach. She doesn't really understand the tradition of Dartmouth hockey. Feels like some of that stuff is at stake. I'm also
yeah.
realizing that, you know, I could pursue playing overseas or something afterwards, but this is probably my last year playing competitively. And also feeling like it was the last I had in me. I was a little burnt out given everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I went into very much a play for the joy, play for myself, but play for my team and serve my team and have conversations with them consistently, like be that person that can be their rock. And that service and servant leadership mindset, like really knocked me out of that, like what ultimately was a selfish cycle, constantly
Yeah.
focusing on myself and my body and what I ate and how I performed. And somebody had told me a couple years ago, but I was realizing it then that they said, Mac, if you spent the amount of time, that you spend worrying about food or your body or being upset like this because of this anxiety and invested it into other things, like think of all the things you could do. And that was both a sad and very real, comment and realization for me that came to fruition my senior year because it was that give to others and I don't even have time to think about, these things that used to be all consuming.
Which is such a good way to get out of that. Like, I think so many people don't really value, or we don't really think it's like we're so into ourselves that like the best way out is to sometimes like lift others up. That's why I always say, like my team, when my athletes are having a bad game, it's like become the biggest cheerleader. Like
Yeah.
give what you want to, what you think you need to everybody else, and then it comes back around, and it's just so powerful. And I think I really want to highlight what you said, which is I grant you permission to change the story.
Mhm.
And it's just a story we keep telling ourselves. And some of us are operating because your identity is so intermingled with that that
Mhm.
it feels like a loss of self to change the story. Like, this
Right.
is the person that I've known, that I've been riding with all this time, and you're telling me to change the story. Well, who am I without this story? So
So real. I and there were years working on that too. Like, who am I without anxiety around food? Who
yeah.
am I without this, constant scrutinization of my body? And particularly moving on from being an athlete, like that was really interesting. I had to get to a point where, I went from training strength training, following a program for 8, 10 years of my
Yeah.
life. And it's what, made me feel good, or so I thought, to a point where I had, not really taken a break. Given some of my mental aspects, I overtrained, I underate, I put my body through the ringer.
Yeah.
And there was a point where it was like, no, stop. Like, I would go lift and I wouldn't have my team there, so it was just me. And I would think about, like, why am I lifting? This hurts
Yeah.
actually. Let me take a break. And I challenged myself too to, not turn to the gym to be that pacifier in a way, to
Yeah.
be that soother, to be that outlet. Let me sit with my emotions. Let me figure out where they're coming from, and let me, like, process and heal from that perspective.
Mm.
And it was a couple months before I got back into lifting and got back into strength training. But when I came back to it, it was interesting because the thing that was always in my head, go harder, put more weight, push further, like, dig to that pain cave,
Mhm.
I realized was actually, like, self-hatred. It was a feeling of unworthiness. And yet that was what I prided myself on as an athlete, was I was always the person willing to dig deeper. So now, I think I'm still figuring it out. When I go to the gym, when I relate to myself as a physical being, when I want to run or go for a hike, um, where does that motivation come from? Because I'm done with it coming from, I'm not valuable, or I have to do this to fix some aspect of myself. But
Yeah.
I still love that pushing limits of potential. So I have to kind of figure out, like, how do I dig that deep from a place of self-love, from a place of what am I capable of, from a place of potential?
Yeah. I think it's that myth that we have to do it always physically instead
Mm,
of like it has to be like I gotta go hard on
yeah.
everything. And it's like if we can find that balance between, like, which is one of my passions, between the masculine and the feminine,
Mhm.
where it's like how much of it do I have to bring? And if I love myself enough and I'm in a good place and I'm taking proper actions, a lot of the heavy lifting is also going to be done on the other end, that I would then just be, grinding to the point of, like, unhealthy behaviors. And so just it's so good that we're having this conversation, and a pleasant surprise. And I know that sounds weird for me to say, it's a pleasant surprise to be talking about an eating disorder, or this anxiety. But so many athletes go through this, so many
So many.
people that are not athletes. And so I think it's helpful to hear how somebody, you're sharing your journey. And I really appreciate you being vulnerable, because that really is going to help a lot of people that are going to hear this. So thank you, Mackenzie. This is great. Um, okay. So you're realizing it's the end, you got a different coach, all that stuff. Now you're navigating out of the sport and going through this process of loving yourself and healing. What's next?
So, I actually fell into rugby, and it's a funny story where, coming up on my senior year, I got to see the women play sevens for the Rio Olympics. And prior to that, my exposure to rugby was, men's 15s over in France. So a language I didn't understand, 250-pound men piling on each other. Like, no way I was going to be able to grasp what was going on. Like,
Right.
the vibes were great and in the stadium, but I didn't understand the nuances of the
Right.
sport. Um, but seeing women play sevens, which is a form of the game that has a lot more space on the field, it's a little bit easier to say, like, okay, that's that person's role. That's how that works.
Right.
As well as a game that, like, showcases speed and physicality a little bit more, whereas 15s is like, you know, team groups and certainly physical, but, like, you don't see the open running and space as much as you do.
Gotcha.
And so, to circle back even to the beginning of our conversation here, it was like, aha, in my mind, this is soccer and hockey
That's what
together.
I was just gonna say.
Yes, exactly. So I was like, no way. Like, if I could even, like, try and capture that feeling of, like, speed and physicality of hockey with the space and the awareness and the smarts of soccer, like, I have to give this a try. Something was just, like, calling me to it.
Yeah.
So I remember one day I, like, got up the courage in the summer to, like, walk into the rugby coach's office. My heart was beating so fast, which I don't know why, because it was either like yes or no, like, and
Right.
either way I move on with my life. But I was like, "Hi, you've never met me, but I'm Mac. I play for the hockey team and I think I would really love rugby. Like I'm fully committed to my senior season of hockey. So that's fall and winter, but I could start now learning the game and figuring things out. And if you would have me for the spring term to be able to come out and play with you guys and train, like, what do you think? And to their credit, they said yes. And, stayed in touch with me through that whole time,
Nice.
gave me a rugby ball, which I proceeded to immediately go down to the field. I must have looked like, I don't know. I would have laughed at myself if I saw me back then,
Right.
just trying to figure out how to throw this ball against a fence. And I only had one. So it was throw, run and pick it up from the fence, run back,
Nice.
throw, and so it was like, I almost felt like a little kid again, of like, oh, this is so fascinating. And I get to be a beginner and I get to, try something new. And I think it eased a little bit the idea that, hockey was going to be a hard stop because I went
Right.
straight from the end of our hockey season. The next week I was jumping in with the rugby team for their lifts and in the gym and part of the team. So I was able to still have that community, that timeline of I have practice in the afternoon and this is a team and we're working together. But with the added value of I'm learning something new and I can give myself a little bit more grace than I ever could on the ice with hockey. So
Because you were like kind of like the more scholarship athlete versus the new beginner. And so okay, so thinking back, knowing what you know now, and I'm not suggesting that the move to rugby is not the best move for you, but do you feel like you didn't really grieve the loss of hockey because you took that time?
it was a crutch, 110%. Like I look back at it and I also went like gung ho into rugby too. It was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, like I want to do it as good as possible. Like
Yeah.
I want to hit these goals. And also seeing, for example, like role models like Alev Kelter, who, was a high level soccer player and then went, played for Wisconsin and played hockey and D1 and I think was on the national team, at least the youth national teams for a little bit. And she became this superstar in rugby. So I was like, okay, there's the path. There's the
Yeah.
opportunity. Like, yeah, obviously the hardo athlete mindset. Let's go.
Right.
Um, and I think I also just felt like really at home in the sport and the culture too, right? So rugby is something where you need all types of body shapes and sizes and physical abilities to succeed.
Yeah.
And it's not come to the team and make your body perform like a rugby player. It's, oh, how does your body perform? Let's find your spot. So
Okay.
immediately, body acceptance was like something that was easier to do in that
Got
setting.
it.
Um, and then it was a place where, they're used to having walk ons, they're used to having new people. So the community was so open arms. And I, love to learn. I'm such a curious person. I ate that up like anybody who would teach me anything or spend extra time. And then, like, even something as small as like, rugby and the cultures that it comes from, like, you know, it would be island music in the locker room all the time and just like vibes and like
Yeah.
that's what I literally listen to 24/7 like any workout like so everybody has their own vibes like mine
Yeah.
is reggae island music like that's it. And
Nice.
so I don't know. I just kind of felt like I found my people
Yeah.
in a way and found this sport that was like this combo of two parts of me that I was able to like marry together. And so I think there every part of me was saying like don't lose this. Like
Yeah.
don't have this just be like a 10-week thing and it disappears. So I continued to pursue it for like another year beyond college. I was working with the team, I was training with the team. I went and played in Hawaii. I broke my collarbone and that kind of reset me. And I came back to work with the team as I was rehabbing and everything. And that was kind of my turning point of, all right, I rehab my collarbone. Absolutely, I can still play. Like I have a metal plate in there. It's
Yeah.
not going anywhere. But what does that look like? And who do I want to play for? Like, do I want to compromise or change like the city that I'm living in so that I can play with a certain team,
Yeah.
XYZ? And through all these experiences, I was more and more solidifying my passion for character development through sport, for that meeting point of psychology and athletics.
Mm.
And that's when I realized like, okay, well, if I want to make a career move, like what job is going to be really fulfilling? Because I had been nanny and dishwashing and training and like all these things. Like I said, I learned I could be gritty and I could grind as an athlete, but at the
Yeah.
same time, you're graduating, Division 1 athletic experience and an Ivy League degree, and you feel like, maybe nannying is not your full value or, expression of yourself to the world.
Yeah.
And there's also the canned definition of success out of those schools that you don't feel like maybe you're meeting.
Mm.
So I was looking at like, okay, I'm about a year and a half past graduation here. What does my career look like? When people ask me what I'm doing, what do I want to say, and how do I pursue that? Got the opportunity to come out and work with US Ski and Snowboard in Utah. Took it for the opportunity to, change of pace, change of scenery, and found that it was really hard to get connected with a team out here, given location and practice times and stuff. And, honestly, COVID hit not too long after. So it was
Yeah.
a series of events where I realized like my bandwidth is dwindling. What I want to compromise or sacrifice for the ability to pursue competitive and high level sport is changing. In high school, it
Yeah.
was a no brainer. I'm missing, somebody's house party. That's fine. But
Yeah.
now, missing the opportunity to build relationships and develop a career, and settle into a new place where, quality of life is important to me and taking advantage of time in the mountains, that was different. So, it was in that chapter, in that time where I realized, okay, recovering from this injury doesn't look like just rolling back into competitive sport,
Yeah.
that all of it kind of started to hit me at once. Like, I'm not a hockey player, and rugby, isn't gonna be able to continue to pan out as that next thing that I give everything to. I need,
Yeah.
instead of give everything to one thing, I need to give, parts of me to multiple things so I can be
Yeah.
balanced in life.
Awesome. That's so, oh man. So this at this point now, and is this where the sideline perspective starts to come to being, or is this more of a hindsight as I go through this dark night of the soul of like, okay, it's all hitting me. I've got to step away from sport. Who am I without this? Because, well, and let me, before you answer that question, I want to say something that I was thinking while you had these qualities though that followed you throughout all of your journey, right? You're somebody that's hungry to get out, improve yourself. You're somebody who works hard. You have all of these things, but we think it's because I'm a hockey player, because
Mhm.
I'm a soccer player, because I play rugby, or I'm an athlete. But I think it's because I'm Mackenzie. What do you think
Mm.
about that?
I love that. And I think like, I mean, even just hearing you say that like gives me shivers because I am, only, 3 years out from like feeling like I was in competitive athlete mode. And I'm still, again, learning to rewrite that story of like where my value comes from and where I place it now, and being very careful where I place it now, like not in my job, not in, my relationship or my financial stability. Like it's got to be inherent because I have learned that lesson. And hearing you affirm that, like, it's just like one of those reminders, like, yeah, yeah, that's right.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so one of your things is the sideline perspective. I had the pleasure of being on your podcast, but it's not just a podcast, it's more of a movement. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the Sideline Perspective, as it exists now, is a community platform, a website, and a social media page, a podcast, and a variety of resources to support injured and retiring athletes in finding where they want to land in life beyond sport, finding who they are, finding where their value comes from, and the concept for it, or the realization for the need for more conversation around these topics primarily came about 7 or 8 months after I graduated. I was, like I said, working in the athletic department and seeing the next generation of Dartmouth student athletes approach their senior day, their
Mhm.
graduation day, as I had just passed mine. And, it was actually, the football team in particular that I was seeing wrestle, or hearing their conversations about, all right, well, we've got pro day coming up, so I'm going to train for that. And then watching the, pro day not go well for them. So they're not they're not going to make the NFL, which was definition number one for success. And they pivot to definition number two, which is the Ivy League aspect of it, suit and tie, job in New York, job in Boston, job in San Francisco, make a lot of money. And, maybe their major didn't fit that. Maybe they didn't have time for all the extracurriculars
Right.
to set their resume apart. Maybe on paper, they don't match up with other graduates. And it broke my heart that nobody taught these people nor myself to create their own definition of success. And
Mm.
that we, just kind of copy and pasted and went with that. And so I wrote a letter to a friend on the football team saying, hey, look at all the things you've accomplished in your athletic career, and they're
Yeah.
going to take you so far. And what you choose to do next is going to be incredible because it's you doing it. And I wrote that because I was realizing I didn't know who else was going to tell him that if I didn't. And very quickly, I was like, I want to write a letter to all of my teammates and to all the graduating athletes. And I wish I got that letter. And,
Yeah.
um, kind of worked from there to figure out what does this look like? How do we tell this to people? How do we have a movement, a message,
Mm.
a community, and a conversation around this so that every athlete knows they're more than their sport? And that, idea it was so clear to me, but I didn't know how I was going to execute. And timeline wise, I moved to Hawaii and continued to pursue rugby shortly after. So there I was, on a beautiful island. Life's good. I'm camping, I'm hiking, I'm happy with my sport. Um, if I didn't break my collarbone and reset and have to come back to New England and reassess who I was and what I was doing, it all may have never come to life. It may have never circled back the way that it did when I returned to campus, rehabbing a collarbone and seeing these athletes again back in this environment, again approaching graduation a year later and figuring out what they were going to do.
I find these things so amazing because it's always like, oh, if this hadn't happened, and then some people kind of say like so crazy or ironic. I'm like, no, there was a mission that you were
Yeah.
charged with, and you're. I think I believe in like the energies of the higher self, and like there's a part that's like this is the mission, this is the deal, and unfortunately to kind of get us off the train of like, well, but this is also where I'm getting my juice, right? Or I think I'm going to get my juice. And I just use juice as for those listening. I know you get it, Mackenzie, but juice, like where I'm getting my value, where I'm getting like, what drives me. And then all of a sudden, the universe goes, nope, your other thing is the thing. And so, manifest the injury. And then now like, you're changing lives for athletes. And it's so important. The more than an athlete movement. I know LeBron has his documentary. I don't know if it's a foundation. I'm trying to find more information about that, but I love that you have the sideline perspective. And we just need more people talking about this because I think a lot of the fans don't know what the athletes go through. And then when they're transitioning out and like, when you were talking about that letter, I was like, oh my God, Mackenzie, like, I'm glad you said, I wish someone had given this to me. Cause I'm like, you were writing it for yourself. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That exactly was like my experience. I thought I was just in love with my life in Hawaii. It was like everything I could have asked for or felt like at that time. And, um, I was like, I'm only going to leave if like I have a plan to come back in exactly, 10 weeks when doctor says this is going to be healed.
Right.
And beyond that, it felt like somebody took like a snow globe life, turned it upside down and was like, oh, this is fun. Let's see where everything lands. And where they landed, I never would have predicted at the time, but I just felt like everything was getting ripped away from me. And instead it was just being built up.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people know that athletes go through that. Like, it's
Yeah.
just that feeling of like, just imagine you're being validated, affirmed by this main vehicle, and then it's almost like it's ripped away from you because you just age out of the sport, or
Right.
there is no upside. Like, there is no professional hockey league to transition into at that time.
Mhm.
Those type of things, and the Olympic team is too small, and you're competing with like the entire country's competing for what, like 15 spots. I don't know how many girls are on a hockey team, so please forgive that. But I want I want to highlight what you said about all the skills, right? Because I thought about this and I was talking to some of my senior athletes, and I'd love for you to expound on this, but this idea that we need to come up with athlete resumes.
Mm,
Because this idea that you have, because a lot of athletes feel like I'm behind the 8 ball because I've competed in sports for so long if I'm
right.
not going to go pro. So what's the resume? Like, what if we come up with a resume to say, I need to go in and sell why these years that I've endeavored in this sport are going to make me a great person to be in your organization.
Yeah. I mean, it's like taking the fact that we essentially got, a master's or a PhD in our sport, and like not to diminish that, because if we put the hours and time we put into our sport into an education or into another position, like we would be, C-suite level, we would be executive, life would be great, but we
Exactly.
invested in another aspect. And what I love about that aspect is that sports are a microcosm for life, that like everything reflected in and around sport, as the athlete, as people within the system, administratively, as fans, as culture, like we are constantly learning about who we are as people, and, what goes or doesn't go in our culture based on how sports play out and how athletes are, become celebrities. And that should absolutely be seen as like a credible and valuable piece of, our investment in our life and in ourselves, and add value. So I think some of the main pieces that are pretty, blanket wise across the board, it shows commitment. It
Yep.
shows, dedication and perseverance. It shows coachability. Yes, there's a talent aspect, but like no matter what your talent level is, you need to be able to either listen to a coach or work within a team. Even individual sports, your
Yeah.
team may not be, somebody that's on the field or out there, competing with you, but it's a team of people who want to see you succeed, a coach, a nutritionist, a PT, etc. So, as well as like personal accountability and ownership. Like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if you want to succeed in that area, you're the one who has to like take the shots or put the reps in, or, put the extra time in. So those are some pretty generalizable ones. And then of course, there's, for me, personal aspects of my journey, battling mental health, or, being an underdog, or having that mindset, or, really holding true to my values in a relatively toxic environment in high school. Like those are things that honestly in job interviews, like people ask, how does this apply? How would you handle the
Yeah.
situation? And I can say, well, I think back to this time as team captain, and it was really applicable.
Exactly. Exactly. So I know that we didn't get to the US skiing, but I want to sort of put an end cap on this interview because but I think that we've talked about a lot of great stuff. So if you want to find more information about the sideline perspective, I'm going to have you share that in just a moment. But it's time for the rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, they're super personal, so just be ready.
Perfect.
All right. What is your favorite flavor of ice cream? Or favorite snack? Yeah, favorite flavor of ice cream.
Yeah. Funny, I was just having this conversation recently. It's mint chocolate cookie by Ben and Jerry's, but I'm really across the board a Ben and Jerry's fan.
Okay, mint chocolate cookie. I don't know if I know that one. Now I'm vegan, so I can't try it, but it sounds delicious because my favorite Girl Scout cookie was the Thin Mint.
Yep.
So that, yeah, like just, yeah. And I like mint chocolate chip, and there are some vegan flavors that I've had. So yes. Okay, awesome. And what is your go-to snack?
Oh, I snack all the time on everything, but I love a good bowl of popcorn. That's pretty standard. If I'm like sitting down somewhere, if I'm on the go, it's a bar of some type.
Okay. Have you ever been to Chicago with the Garrett's popcorn with the sweet and the cheesy popcorn or the caramel or any of that?
I have not, but I'm picturing those like holiday popcorn bins where there's like
Yeah,
three
yeah.
different kinds. Yeah.
Okay, you
I don't
like that though? You like the mix? Cause see, I think I just like regular popcorn, or I like sweet popcorn, but I don't like the mix.
I was gonna say, I actually like that's really rich to me. I kind of like just the straight up, like I'll either air pop it, and then like my hack is using the spray cans of like olive oil so that it's
Oh,
like got a little flavoring, and then you can put salt, like you could go sweet or salty or
okay.
whatever on there. You could put cinnamon, you could
Yeah.
put garlic powder. So that's
Yeah.
kind of how I do
Okay.
it.
Okay. I like that. All right. What superpower would you want and why?
Mm. I I would probably want the superpower of time travel. I think I would really have a blast getting to like see and learn and experience other
Where
time
would you
zone like
go? What time period?
cultures.
Like, definitely go. What would your go-to be?
I
I know you would go to multiple, but like your first.
yeah, I love like music from the 60s, so I would want to go back there and like go dance.
Go to Woodstock, right? Get in the crowd. Okay. All right. This one is probably the most personal. The toilet paper. People have preferences here. So I have a couple of questions about that. Are you an over the top or an under the bottom? And why do you choose what you choose?
Over always, and probably just because I'm slightly OCD.
Okay, I've literally not had anyone say under yet, but I'm convinced we'll find one because I know they
It
exist.
just feels right. Also, like I remember there was we had to memorize poems in fourth grade. Somebody did a whole poem on that of like, over is the way to go. Like if you do under, you're weird.
Right.
I think that's stuck with me.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, athletes, it just feels like over the top, just feels like on brand, But okay, so question, because this is true for me. If the toilet paper is wrong at your house, do you change it?
Yes.
Okay. If it's wrong at my house, do you change it?
Ooh. I think that like there's a scale of like level of friendship and people that I know, and if there's a chance of me using that bathroom again.
Okay. Because there's people that literally will change it at other people's houses. Okay. Also, last question, as far as the bathroom situation, are you a bathroom snooper? Do you go through other people's cabinets or anything like that?
No, unless I have an urgent need for something, and even then I'll probably just ask.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Okay, cool. All right. And then the last question is who is your, well, two questions. Who is your personal hero?
Personal hero, Abby Wambach. That goes all the way back to like
Yeah.
watching the national team with my dad, like knowing and idolizing her before, people really understood like the level of impact she was gonna have on the game, all the way up through like, yeah, just seeing her grow as a player and now an advocate for so many things in life.
Okay. It seems that my camera's frozen. So the good news is we still have the audio. And last question, what do you want to most be remembered for?
I think I've grown to have a personal definition of success that is, being somebody who makes other people feel seen and heard and valued, particularly in times and opportunities when they don't see it for themselves. So I would like that to be my legacy, that, I listened, I understood, I was non-judgmental, and I helped them, find their value for themselves.
All right. Well, you've already done that. You're continuing to do it with the sideline perspective. Where do we find out more about you, the sideline perspective? What else do you want us to know about you?
Yeah. On a personal level, you can find me on Instagram at mstonge.12. So MSTONGE.12. Otherwise, it's kind of across the board for the sideline perspective, either at the sideline perspective on Instagram, the sidelineperspective.com, or the sideline perspective podcast.
Okay. And my last question is I forgot to ask you this, and I think this is important. What is your number one tip or mental advantage, to take advantage of the name of the podcast, that you would pass on to people listening, former athletes, current athletes, etc.?
Mm. Something like a tool that I was able to find that was pretty effective for myself in times of, mental struggle, or I'm really hung up on something, there's anxiety, I don't know how to overcome something, um, is to ask the first question, why do you care? Like, why do you truly care? And sometimes that eliminates it right then. Like, oh, I don't really have a good reason to care about this. Like it's actually not a reflection of me, it's a reflection of someone else. But if I can come up with a good reason why I care, why I'm upset, why it's bothering me, then the next question is, where does gratitude come in? Like,
Mm.
where can I be grateful for some aspect of this experience, some aspect of this opportunity, this relationship, this challenge? What is it teaching me? And I just think gratitude is really powerful. So, why do I care? Where does gratitude come in?
Love that. Love that. Love that. All right. Well, this has been fun, Mackenzie. I hope you enjoyed it. Definitely, everybody, please connect with Mackenzie. And just thank you for sharing everything today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a great conversation.